Most people live their lives enslaved by a single invisible chain, the concern for what others think of them. They bend their backs to carry the burden of opinions, expectations, and judgments that were never their own. The tragedy is not that society demands conformity. The tragedy is that the individual willingly sacrifices his soul at the altar of approval. When a man gives too much concern to the voices outside of himself, he forgets the voice that whispers within. His instincts, his creative energy, his inner vision, these are smothered under the suffocating weight of collective opinion. He becomes like a puppet, dancing to strings pulled by the faceless crowd. What he calls virtue is often nothing more than fear of rejection. What he calls morality is often submission to rules he never questioned. The greatest prison is not built of stone or iron, but of fucks given. The endless energy wasted on whether one is liked, praised, or accepted. Every time you give a fuck about something unworthy, you hand over a piece of your freedom. You trade the vast, wild forest of your being for a neatly trimmed garden designed to please strangers. But beneath the mask, the shadow stirs. The unlived life grows restless. The repressed desires, the forgotten dreams, the authentic impulses, they do not vanish. They retreat into the darkness of the unconscious, and there they gather power. This is why the man who lives only for appearances is secretly tormented. He smiles in public, yet trembles when alone. He seems respectable, yet feels hollow. The individual who wishes to live fully must learn the sacred art of not giving a fuck. This does not mean indifference to life itself. Rather, it means indifference to the false idols of approval. It means standing firm in one's truth, even when misunderstood, even when mocked, even when condemned. For what is the value of a life spent in obedience to the herd? A life that never risks offense, never dares to create, never embraces its own darkness. To refuse to give a fuck is to reclaim your energy from the crowd and return it to the depths of your soul. It is to follow the path of individuation, where the goal is not to be liked, but to be whole. Wholeness requires courage, the courage to disappoint others, the courage to confront your own shadow, the courage to walk alone if necessary. The man who no longer gives a fuck about appearances becomes dangerous, not because he seeks to destroy, but because he is free. His thoughts are no longer dictated by the collective, but by the archetypal forces that surge from within. His life begins to radiate meaning, not because he sought approval, but because he followed the compass of his inner necessity. And here lies the paradox. The less you give a fuck about what others think, the more authentic you become, and the more deeply you connect with those who matter. The world does not need more obedient faces. It needs whole individuals who dare to stand apart. Only they can bring light into the collective darkness. So I tell you this, giving a fuck about what does not belong to you, this is the worst thing you can do. For in doing so, you betray the one task for which you were born, to become yourself. Most people spend the greater part of their lives bending under the weight of what others expect from them. They are constantly aware of how they are being seen, constantly measuring their worth against the shifting judgments of society. They shape their words, their clothes, their choices, and even their dreams around an imagined audience that never stops watching. This slavery to external opinion is so deeply ingrained that it feels natural. Yet it is the very force that silences the authentic inner voice. A man who cannot detach himself from what the crowd thinks of him becomes a servant, not of his own spirit, but of the faceless collective that demands his conformity. The hunger for approval begins early. As children, we learn that certain actions earn praise and others invite punishment. Slowly, the fear of rejection replaces the joy of self-expression. The child who once laughed freely now wonders whether his laughter is too loud. The girl who once drew strange shapes on paper now erases them to copy what the teacher prefers. The boy who wanted to sing loudly now whispers so as not to sound foolish. These little sacrifices appear harmless, but over years they accumulate into the great tragedy of adulthood, the inability to live one's own life without reference to the gaze of others. When a man's compass is fixed on the judgments of others, his life is no longer his own. His career, his relationships, his values, and even his desires are chosen not because they spring from within, but because they will be accepted. He does not ask, "What do I want?" but rather, "What will make me appear worthy?" In this way, the authentic inner voice is drowned out by the constant noise of social approval. It becomes faint, like a whisper in a storm, until finally the man cannot hear it at all. He forgets he ever had an inner guide and mistakes the voice of the crowd for his own. This enslavement is subtle because society rewards it. Those who obey the unspoken rules are praised as respectable, virtuous, or successful. They receive applause, recognition, and comfort. Yet beneath the surface, they often feel a persistent emptiness. Something essential has been lost. The connection to the deep well of individuality that lives beyond social masks. To silence the inner voice in exchange for acceptance is to trade the infinite possibilities of the self for the narrow role of the obedient citizen. The man who spends his life trying to meet expectations is not truly living. He is acting. Every gesture becomes a performance, every word chosen to fit the script, every decision shaped by the desire to be approved. Over time, the mask grows so tightly bound to his face that he cannot distinguish where the mask ends and the self begins. This is the ultimate tragedy, to die without ever having been oneself. The authentic inner voice does not shout, it does not command in the way society does. It whispers, it nudges, it comes in dreams, in sudden longings, in flashes of creativity, in moments of rebellion. It speaks the language of the soul, not of the crowd. But to hear it requires silence, courage, and above all, the refusal to be enslaved by external opinion. Those who give all their energy to being liked or respected never make room to listen. They mistake approval for truth and applause for meaning. The silencing of the inner voice also gives rise to hidden suffering. When a man ignores what his soul longs for, the unlived life retreats into the unconscious. It becomes shadow, haunting him with dissatisfaction, anxiety, or depression. He wonders why he feels restless despite outward success, why joy slips through his fingers, why life feels hollow. The answer lies in the fact that he has betrayed himself. Every compromise made for acceptance accumulates as inner poison. This enslavement to external opinion also weakens the spirit. When a man cannot act without seeking validation, he becomes dependent, fragile, and afraid. He fears ridicule more than he fears death. He fears disapproval more than he fears betraying his own soul. In this state, courage is impossible, creativity is stifled, and freedom is a dream. Such a man may be admired by the world, but inside he is small, trapped, and voiceless. The world itself suffers because of this. When countless individuals give up their authenticity, society becomes uniform, shallow, and stagnant. Innovation dies, art becomes imitation, morality becomes conformity, and truth becomes whatever the majority approves. The greatest discoveries and transformations in history have always come from those who refuse to give themselves over to external judgment. Those who listen to their inner voice, no matter how unpopular, carried the torch of progress. Without such individuals, the collective remains asleep, trapped in its own mediocrity. To recognize this pattern is to see the invisible prison in which most people live. The walls are not built of stone, but of opinions. The guards are not soldiers, but neighbors, co-workers, friends, and even family. The chains are forged from the constant question, what will they think of me? As long as this question dominates the mind, the authentic self remains locked away, unheard, unseen, unlived. This is why giving too much concern to external opinions is more than just a bad habit. It is a betrayal of the soul. It prevents the individual from discovering his own path, his own truth, his own unique contribution to the world. It silences the voice that could have guided him toward wholeness, meaning, and freedom. Instead of becoming who he truly is, he becomes a reflection of what others demand, a mirror of collective expectations, a hollow shell of borrowed value. The tragedy is not only personal but universal. Every time a man silences his inner voice to please the world itself loses something irreplaceable. A song never sung, a thought never expressed, an act of courage never taken. The collective becomes poorer, not richer, when individuality is sacrificed to conformity. The chains of opinion are strong because they appeal to fear, fear of rejection, fear of isolation, fear of shame. Yet the cost of surrendering to these fears is far greater than the cost of facing them. To live by external approval is to live half a life, to breathe without ever feeling the fullness of the soul. The authentic voice waits patiently, but it does not wait forever. A life spent ignoring it becomes a life of regret, a life haunted by what could have been. If only the courage had been found to stop giving a fuck about what others think. The human being is never entirely what he appears to be. Behind every carefully polished exterior, behind every smile of respectability, there exists another side that longs for expression. When an individual sacrifices his truth for the sake of approval, this hidden side, the unlived life, does not simply vanish. It withdraws into the unconscious where it gathers strength, becoming shadow. What begins as a small compromise, an ignored desire, or a silenced impulse grows into a restless presence within the psyche, and sooner or later it makes itself known through inner torment. The man who constantly bends to the expectations of others imagines he is safe. He tells himself that obedience brings peace, that acceptance will protect him from loneliness. Outwardly, he may even succeed. He gains recognition, perhaps wealth, perhaps honor, but within, there is a growing dissonance. He senses that he is playing a role in a play he never chose. He feels the weight of a life unlived pressing against the walls of his mind. The laughter he forces feels hollow. The duties he fulfills feel meaningless. The approval he receives feels undeserved. This is because his deepest self has been abandoned. The psyche does not forgive such abandonment easily. Dreams often reveal what the conscious mind refuses to admit. Images of rebellion, symbols of hidden desire, frightening encounters with shadow figures. These are not random fantasies. They are messages from the parts of the soul that have been exiled. They demand recognition. They demand integration. They demand life. When they are ignored, they express themselves in darker ways through depression, anxiety, addiction, or destructive behavior. The very man who seems respectable by day may find himself tormented by restlessness at night, unable to escape the voice of his neglected self. This torment is not punishment, but necessity. The unlived life seeks expression, and when blocked, it forces itself through cracks in the facade. The more a man silences his inner truth for the sake of appearances, the more violently it insists on being heard. He may suddenly feel rage with no clear cause or longing for freedom that disrupts his comfortable existence. He may fall into despair despite having all that society told him to seek. The torment is the proof that the self cannot be destroyed, only denied. To live only for approval is to make a pact with emptiness. Outward harmony is achieved at the cost of inward chaos. The soul cannot be deceived by applause or honors. It knows what it has sacrificed. And so long as that sacrifice continues, the man remains at war with himself. The unlived life becomes an enemy within, restless and dissatisfied, waiting for the moment to remind him of all that he abandoned in the name of being acceptable. Freedom begins where the obsession with appearances ends. As long as an individual is bound to the gaze of others, he cannot take a single step without calculating how it will be seen, how it will be judged, how it will be measured against the standards of the crowd. In this condition, every decision is borrowed, every gesture rehearsed, and every word chosen to maintain an image. The self is suffocated under the weight of masks. But the moment a man withdraws his concern from these illusions, the moment he ceases to give a fuck about appearances, a different life begins to unfold. A life rooted not in approval, but in authenticity. Wholeness is not achieved by pleasing others or fitting into the mold of society's expectations. Wholeness requires embracing one's true individuality, with all its contradictions, flaws, and untamed impulses. To be whole is to allow both light and shadow to coexist within oneself, to listen to the inner voice that whispers in opposition to the collective shout. This path demands courage, for it often requires disappointing those who demand conformity. It requires the strength to walk alone, to risk disapproval, to stand apart even when mocked or condemned. Yet only by making the sacrifice does one reclaim the freedom that was lost to appearances. The individual who learns not to care for appearances is no longer easily manipulated. He is no longer swayed by the praise of others, nor paralyzed by their criticism. His center of gravity shifts inward, toward the deep well of his own being. From this place, he acts with conviction, not because it will be rewarded, but because it is true to who he is. This authenticity is what makes him dangerous in the eyes of society, not because he seeks destruction, but because he cannot be controlled. His freedom exposes the falseness of those who still live as slaves to opinion. To stop giving a fuck about appearances is not to reject others or to embrace recklessness. It is to recognize that the measure of a life is not found in how it looks from the outside, but in how deeply it resonates with the truth within. The man who embodies this truth becomes whole, and from this wholeness radiates a quiet strength that inspires others. He ceases to be a mirror reflecting the expectations of the world and instead becomes a flame burning with his own light. In this light, appearances lose their power and individuality takes its rightful place as the foundation of freedom.